All right, welcome to this American Philanthropic Scotch Talk. We're going to talk about capital campaigns today, and I'm going to not get going just right away as people are still rolling in here for this next hour of discussion on capital campaigns. So I'll give it a little bit of time. In the meantime, I will just in case you haven't been to these before. So this is very casual. It's just a conversation. It's called a Scotch Talk because the idea is that we are drinking Scotch, just getting together late afternoon on a Thursday, have Scotch and talk about things. It's 1:00 p.m. where I am on a Thursday, so it's basically the middle of the day. And but do you have a drink? I have a glass of mezcal in my hand today that it's kind of become my drink. Steve, what do you got?
I'm drinking a coffee Kolsch.
Yeah.
So I'm meeting in the middle of the day with coffee and beer at the same time.
See, now that seems appropriate. That is actually well done. And Dan?
So I'm Eastern Standard Time, and it's 4:00 here, and I'm drinking. I have a beer in my Purdue tumbler here, so
you're ready to go.
Going for the Boilers tomorrow.
Who do they play tomorrow?
Well, they play the Cinderella team, St. Peter's. So everyone in the country is rooting against Purdue.
Outside of a small window around Lafayette, West Lafayette. Well, yes, Dan went to Purdue. So with that, we'll go ahead. We'll get going here. Hope everybody's brackets are doing better than mine. And we'll get going and talk about capital campaigns. Thanks for joining us. We've got quite a few people here today, and people from very widely varying levels of experience in fundraising and probably with capital campaigns. So we're going to hit different levels of experience in the questions and answers we give. So hopefully we'll touch on something that you find interesting. But regardless, put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to monitor that as best I possibly can, and we will ask you a question if we all can. So don't be shy. Put your questions in there. Introduce yourself in there. Tell us what you're drinking. If you're drinking anything, that's fine if you're not. But if you are, let us know. My name is Jeremy Beer. I'm the co-founder and CEO at American Philanthropic. Really happy to be with you here today. And happy to have with me my colleagues Dan Folta and Steve Bird, whom I will introduce here in a second. But first, a couple of housekeeping issues I want to hit now because I always forget to do this at the end of these things. But I'm always supposed to bring this sort of thing up. A couple of things on the Amphil side you may be interested in. First of all, if you are interested in capital campaigns and going deeper than we get into this casual Scotch talk, we have 2 capital campaigns masterclasses on advancing your mission with a successful campaign coming up. You can find out exactly when. Well, they're on April 28th and September 28th. AmericanPhilanthropic.com/events. You'll find them there as well as other events we have going on. If you use the code Civil Society, that's 2 words, Civil Society, you get 20% off the master classes. So if that's of interest to you, check that out. And also, if you are in or near Orlando, Florida, or you have donors down there that you want to visit and looking for a good excuse, we have a conference coming up on April 1st. No, the conference is on April 6th. But you have to register by April 1st for a conference on democracy and philanthropy in America in Winter Park, Florida. Senator Ben Sasse will be keynoting that conference for us. Should be a lot of fun. You meet a lot of good people. It's great networking and great conversation, high-level conversation about philanthropy. So we'd love for you to join us for that. All right, that's it for the advertisements. My colleagues, Dan Folta and Steve Bird. Dan, as you already know, unfortunately went to Purdue. I went to Indiana. This is one of the many things that, it's a troubling about our relationship, Dan. But besides that, he's a great guy. And he's a managing consultant here at Amphil, runs our capital campaigns division, has worked with a number of organizations on their fundraising and on capital campaigns at Purdue, among other places, Western Governors University, Conner Prairie Museum, which is where all of us Indiana kids used to go on our field trips back when I was in school, and United World Mission, and has just a ton of experience in this area. Lives in Fishers, Indiana, with his wife, 4 kids, and 2 dogs. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jeremy. Good to be on. And just by the way, for your information, fellow colleague of mine, Judy Schumacher's from Purdue, is on the call as well. So, hi,
yeah,
Judy.
She was the first one in. Hello, Judy Schumacher. It's great to see you. God, I'm really outnumbered by Purdue people here. I hope this doesn't get even worse as the day goes on. Steve Bird did not go to Purdue, which is one of the best things about him. He went to the University of Dallas. Lives in Scottsdale. He's actually right across this wall to my left here in Phoenix with me. One of our managing consultants here at Anfield also works in the capital campaigns practice. Has done a lot, especially in the world of church and faith-based fundraising and capital campaigns. He lives here with his wife, Cindy, and how many children, Steve? There's a lot of children.
I lose track sometimes. We have 5.
5. Okay. That's a good number. Yeah. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here.
All right. Well, we'll get going. I think we said we're going to talk about, lots of aspects of capital campaigns. Let's just start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about a capital campaign? Are we always talking about building a building? What is it that makes a capital campaign unique and distinctive? Either one of you guys can take that.
Yeah, I'll start, Jeremy. And you mentioned capital campaign, and I would say just campaigns in general as well, because capital, I think, refers to like building facility type of campaign. So, campaigns could be endowment. It could be an endowment campaign or campaigns to raise money for programs. So, it implies a start time and a finish time in a campaign, and you're trying to drive campaign activity within that time frame. So
it implies a special initiative, no matter what you're raising money for, right? Right. The implication really for campaign in this sense we're talking about it is it's different than your annual fundraising. Is that correct?
That's right. This would be something above and beyond an annual fund. And so often, could be 6 months to multiple years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, then I think that's pretty straightforward. We've established that. We don't have to be talking about a capital campaign per se, which, as you say, implies typically you're creating capital, you're building a building or something like that. It could be an endowment campaign, it could be a special program campaign. How do you know, regardless, like, why do people even start campaigning? How do you know if you're ready for a campaign, if a campaign is right for you? Like, what are the triggers? Like, say you're a nonprofit leader, you're a development director, you're on this call, CEO or president. What are the criteria, maybe a checklist you run down in your mind to know if you're ready for a campaign, Steve?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of times organizations aren't really ready for a campaign, and they might think they are. So that's some of the work that we do, is kind of helping you figure that out. What's your annual fundraising look like right now? Have you done a good job of kind of cultivating who your major donors are? And do they have a sense of where the organization is going? Or is there maybe more work to be done? So we almost always recommend starting with a feasibility study. So that really kind of helps answer those questions for you, and also helps answer, among other things, how much could be maybe potentially raised in a capital campaign, if this idea you have or project or need you need to fill, is it achievable through a major fundraising effort? Is now the right time to really dive into that? So, that's something we almost always recommend. But there's also, certain organizational benchmarks, I would say, to generally know, okay, this is probably a good time. If we haven't done a campaign in a while, not to say that there's a reason just to do it for the sake of doing a campaign, but it does kind of give you a great opportunity to engage with your donors, kind of give them, check in with them, and rally support around the organization, and maybe, like you said, a particular program, a particular need that is essential to you moving forward as an organization.
So one of the answers to this question is, well, a feasibility study is how you're going to know whether you are ready for a campaign. But before you even get into like paying for a feasibility study, Dan, Steve hit on some of these, but what would you say? What are those organizational benchmarks? Like, is it like, well, you should have done a campaign for the previous 5 years, or you should have at least 1,000 active donors or 10,000 active donors? I mean, are there benchmarks like that that people can kind of click off before they even get to the feasibility study?
Yeah, I'm not sure about benchmarks. I mean, what I'm looking for is one, do you have a plan? So, is there a strategy on what you're trying to accomplish? And, some organizations will get antsy about jumping into a campaign without actually thinking through a plan of what they want to raise money for. It seems kind of weird, but that does happen sometimes. So you got to have a plan and what is the impact going to be for strategically for the organization. I would also say you have to have the people in place. You have to have a good leadership in place, strong board, a strong enough board that can help with the campaign. And then you have to agree on priorities. You have to agree, meaning that the organization, that the board, certainly the leadership and the board and the staff need to agree on the priorities of what needs to be tackled in the campaign. Mm-hmm. And so, what we're looking at early, like before jumping into a feasibility study, is we're digging into the database, the donor base, seeing what that looks like on an annual basis. What is there a significant capacity? Is there good loyalty? We're looking for if they have capacity from staff to conduct a campaign, just some internal things like that.
It all depends, of course, on the size of the campaign. We'll get back, by the way, to the feasibility study, but we'll dive into that a little bit more, what that consists of and why you do it. But let me get into the weeds. Maybe it's a little higher level question here. Is there a ratio between annual fundraising and how much you could expect to maybe raise in a campaign? So I want to build a new building. We raise $2 million a year now. Let's say we raise $5 million a year now. Is there a common idea ratio wise? Well, yeah, your campaign might be 2x in your annual fundraising. That's reasonable, or 5x. Is there a number like that out there?
Yeah, there's definitely a number out there. And so it depends on, what number you want to believe.
Okay.
But there's some good rationale behind that. So I've heard anywhere from, a 3x to 5x, mm-hmm. And it could depend on how long that campaign may be, of course. Right. So that's part of the factoring of.
Depends on the strength of your file and everything. I get that, but that's, okay. Yeah.
You also want to keep in mind too that typically you're asking people to pledge in a campaign over years, in most cases. So that's 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
You're raising 3x of your annual fund. So essentially you're kind of doubling your annual fundraising for a set amount of time.
Right. Yeah. And that's another distinctive feature of campaigns as we kind of wind our way into this here, is that they tend to involve pledges. You don't ask people typically to pledge their annual gift. You just ask them for their gift throughout the year and multiple gifts. But a campaign, you typically ask for a pledge of how long did you say, Steve? 3 to 5 years?
That's most common. And it really, sometimes you hear a different rationale for whether it should be 3 or 5. And I would say that really depends on where the organization's at and what they're trying to accomplish. If they think they're going to have to conduct another campaign after, the one they're thinking about, might make more sense to do 3 years. And
right.
If they're really trying to, be ambitious in one campaign and raise as much as possible, then you might look at doing a 5-year campaign.
Let's go back then to, we'll get back to the pledge, because there's a lot of technical questions we could get into in terms of pledges, redemption, and how you get them redeemed, and what percentage of pledges are redeemed and all that, which Steve knows a lot about, I know, from his work with parishes. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, let's say we have a good plan. Let's say we have a good strategy. Everybody's aligned, board to staff, what it is, the special thing we need to raise money for. what you already mentioned, a feasibility study. Is that the next step? Is there, or do we need to get a renderings first? Like, do we need to go get architectural renderings? Is that the next step? So we know how much this building is going to cost, let's say. Steve, what's the order of things from the time that these, let's say we have things aligned, what's the ordering of steps after that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we hear that a lot from clients that we're working with. How far down that road should we get in planning and paying an architect to design if it is a building project? And I would say there's a balance there, right? You don't want to get too far down that road if nobody likes the plan, right? Or you find out nobody's really behind the plan, or it's not feasible to raise that much, and then you're kind of that would be a loss, and all that time and money you're devoting into kind of formalizing the plan. On the other hand, you kind of need something you can put in front of people that they can actually give you feedback on and perhaps get excited about. So I would say it's very hard to have nothing and just like have it all conceptual and not really start even looking at basic design or basic rendering or something you could at least use in the feasibility study to get some feedback on.
Right.
On the other hand, I wouldn't go with the full-blown design and all of that, until you have a better sense of how much capacity there might be.
Dan?
Yeah, no, I think, Steve, you said it well. And we were talking about this earlier today. Sometimes where it really makes sense to get those renderings. There are times where, I've been a part of working with clients on campaigns where, we'll steal some images. We want to give the donor an idea and the case for support of what this could look like. This new space could look like. It doesn't have to be the exact renderings of it. And you make sure you're describing that this is what we're envisioning. But you can also be on a big university project where you need high level renderings and some drawings that you're going to need to spend a little money on.
Right. So it really depends on your institution where you are, right? So yeah, university where you would have the capital, the cash reserves to pay to get the really high level renderings done even before you enter the feasibility or the campaign phase. If you're a school or a church, maybe without those kinds of reserves, just doing something. Because what I heard you saying, Steve, that's what you're doing in the feasibility study, and we'll get to all the elements of it too, but partly what you're doing is just trying to build excitement to inspire people to see what might be possible if a campaign were undertaken. And you're also not trying to bake the cake entirely. Isn't that right? Like you're sort of presenting the ingredients of the cake or the halfway, what do you think of this cake? We want people to feel like they're part of the process here, the planning process, the conceptualizing process, the imagining process. Is that kind of what you're doing in the feasibility study? Steve?
Yeah, I would say that, that's definitely what you're trying to do. And there's just other benefits to feasibility study or other advantages beyond just answering is this something we can accomplish or how much can we raise? Just like you're saying, Jeremy, it's kind of a great opportunity to do just basic fundraising stuff, like get in touch with your donors, actually get their feedback, but also make them feel like we're important enough to you that you want to hear from us.
Right.
That makes me feel different about an organization. It's that old adage, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, kind of a thing. There really is something to that. And it gives you an excuse. A lot of times fundraisers are kind of looking for an excuse to reach out and have something to talk about, with the folks in their portfolio. This is a great opportunity to talk about the organization, where it's headed, how this one project or this one program is going to advance and level up the organization. So there's a lot of other corollary benefits than just answering kind of the feasibility question or the money question.
Dan, should you always do a feasibility study before you go forward with the campaign?
Good question, and we get that question asked a lot, and we do recommend it. We're not just saying it because we're consultants. We do feasibility studies, but when I was working, on the other side, working for non-for-profits, before going into a campaign, we would always do a feasibility study, most organizations aren't in campaign mode all the time. Universities are a little bit more than other types of organizations, but this is such a big deal. You want to make sure you get it right and you're really prudent in how you approach the campaign. It's really tempting to jump in and think you got the buckets that you want to raise money for, and you have a pretty good feel on your donors and you've been cultivating. It's tempting to jump in, but a lot of people don't realize what the benefit of a feasibility study brings you, as far as like not just identifying how much money you can raise or potentially raise, but it's identifying the strategy for each of your top donors that are being interviewed, so that you go in, you're going to hit the ground running on the campaign right away. Yep. And then not only that, you're getting some other recommendations on how you prepare your organization for the campaign. It could be staffing recommendations. It could be implementing a new planned giving program. It could be a lot of different things.
Yeah, to me, it's like even if you're going to go forward with the campaign, it's kind of crazy to skip the feasibility study stage, because you're skipping perhaps the most important part of the campaign, which is this opportunity to let your donors tell a third party how much they would give, why they would give, what excites them, what doesn't excite them, what the messages that really speak to them, those that don't, what they love about their end rings, what they don't like about it. I mean, why would you want to skip all of that incredibly valuable information, even if you're going to go forward one way or another? It just seems the benefit of skipping the feasibility studies escapes me.
Minor, the expense is minor in the scope of the benefit and the amount of money you're probably going to raise on top of what you normally would be able to do.
Well, let's stay on that then. We can go back to, if people have questions about feasibility studies, please ask them in the chat. There's a few questions here, very practical. Let's just stay with you, Dan, and we come back to Steve, because you're talking about expense. First of all, you mentioned before 3 to 5x maybe is a good benchmark. It all depends on your file, depends on your organization in terms of how much you can raise in a capital campaign compared to what you're raising annually. Judy asks, hey, is that counting campaign dollars? Is that in addition to? That's over and above annual fundraising dollars, right? That 3 to 5x.
Yeah, no, 3 to 5x would be like your annual fund 3 to 5 times, right? Okay. And then so your campaign amount would yes, I think if I understand Judy's question correctly, yes, it would be.
Right. So it's like if you're raising 3 million, you think you raised 9 to 15 in capital campaign. That's an addition. That's not right. Taking away the 3 million. Right. And we can talk about, by the way, if people are interested, what are some of the strategies you use in the campaign process to make sure you're not cannibalizing your annual fundraising? That's a question I have for you guys. Put a pin in that one. We're going to keep clearing out some questions here, though. Steve, when we're talking about doing planned giving, Michael asked this question. We've talked about before how it's not your top givers who are your best planned giving candidates, but often it's your most loyal givers, the people who've been with you the longest, people who've given you the most gifts. Are there some non-obvious things that make people a potentially really good capital campaign giver other than just being a top donor? That's a really good question, by the way, Michael.
Well, one of the things we almost always do is a wealth screen, and we would recommend as part of that process. So there's probably people in your organization that could be giving a lot more. And we would try to identify that through the feasibility study. So they may not already be in your top tier. And we would want to try to fold them into the list of people we're trying to interview or get their feedback on. And sometimes that could be kind of, people wonder like, well, are they going to feel like, why are you reaching out to me? I haven't really been a supporter that long. Generally, I feel like people like feeling like oh, you want to hear my opinion? Sure. Like, yeah. So I think there's more openness than you might be anticipating to that. So I'll say, yeah, certainly wealth screening can kind of help identify that. And then obviously if it's something like a planned giving campaign, or something for endowment, age is a factor. You look at that longevity of giving, right? So you might want to skew more towards that history of giving rather than how much they've given to you in the last year or two, and or overall. So yeah, certainly there's other factors.
You hit on something we should clarify about feasibility studies. When you're doing a feasibility study, you typically go out and you interview how many donors typically as part of the study?
Yeah, typically, we want to talk to at least 25 of your top donors, maybe beyond that if the scale of the project would call for that.
Yeah, 50, 5. Yeah. But you were saying, I think it's the point I just want to make sure comes out is when you're coming up with your list of 30, 40 people to interview, throw in some people who have a lot of capacity but are not yet big donors, and see what kind of feedback you get from them, correct? Okay, good. So
yeah, and it might be harder to get in front of those people, but it's still worth the effort. Yeah.
Dan, would you ever throw in people outside your file into the feasibility study? Great prospects from the region, or who have a history of giving this thing that you do, your mission, but have never given to you. Is that ever done?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jeremy. And it does. I would say sometimes it makes sense to take a little bit of a gamble and try to interview some people that may be unaffiliated with the organization. And I would say they need to be aligned in like the mission aligned, and certainly have capacity. And I would say you don't want to do that very often, because it's a you usually want to have some kind of connection, or else it's just going to be very difficult to get them signed up to interview.
Right. Yeah, good point. Dan, would you ever recommend going longer than 5 years for a capital campaign?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, absolutely. Universities do it. When you're in a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar campaign, it could make sense. I would say most are going to be shorter than that, and there's some reason. You don't want things to drag on and people just get tired of hearing. Obviously there's a quiet phase, right? And you're not really pumping it as much as you would in the public phase. However, it's a drain on an organization. So on staff, on leadership, just board members, and donors too. Donors can suffer fatigue. So yeah.
You just mentioned a very important distinction we haven't talked about yet, which is the idea of a quiet phase in a campaign. What is that? And why would you be in a quiet phase? What's the difference between the quiet phase and whatever other phases there are? How does that work, Dan?
Yeah, quiet phase is basically you're not shouting from the rooftops that you're in a campaign, and you've done the planning part and you've done the interviews, the feasibility study, and now you're in the quiet phase where you're actually soliciting your lead or your major gift donors who are at the top part of your pyramid, in the gift pyramid. And so you're having private, conversations. Your leader of the organization is helping with some of the fundraising, and you're trying to secure, we say at least, I would say at least 50 to 75% of the campaign. And so in that quiet phase, and often, that's like the underneath the iceberg, right? That a lot of the work's taking place, and you're making a lot of solicitations and you're getting a lot of commitments. And then, when you're ready to go public, when you have, let's say, 70% raised, then you're ready to launch it to the masses. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
No, that's okay. Though. The idea though is you don't go public until you go public in a way that's got a lot of momentum and positivity behind it already, right? Isn't that the idea?
Right.
And
Right.
the idea maybe also is that are donors a little bit flattered that you're coming to them in the quiet phase, that this isn't even public yet? Is that also kind of part of how it works psychologically, that you're, early in?
Yeah, absolutely. They're considered insiders, and you're going to them and asking them to help lead the campaign. And so usually you're going to have a cabinet, campaign cabinet that's helping drive the campaign even in the quiet phase, and helping with some of the solicitations as well. But yeah, exactly. You're appealing to your donors in a way that they're an insider.
Right. Very powerful. Well, there's lots of things that have been thrown out there. If you have questions about them, like the campaign cabinet, we haven't talked about yet, so you can put a pin in that one as well. Steve, let's go back to another question from our friend Sam Warner here. If you're raising it's an endowment campaign, not a building campaign, not a capital campaign. So there aren't renderings. But for instance, they're raising endowment funds for scholarships. What would you replace the renderings of a building with what are the images you would use to excite donors in such a case?
Yeah, that's an easy one. I would just do pictures of kids. That's whatever is gonna be the reason why people would give. And in that case, it would be the students, and probably have some testimonials from students and recipients of those scholarships and what they've been able to go on and do. So yeah, in that case, you kind of, although that takes some work sometimes to compile and getting responses from alumni and whatnot, at least you're not kind of, having to pay for the architectural fees and stuff like that. So that would be a good situation.
Would you repurpose such funds, if you had them, assuming, toward maybe like how important is it to have like really great video? We talk about the collateral around a campaigns or renderings. Might say we call it collateral material, right? It's like going to be really nice material put in front of a donor, makes you look really professional, like you know what you're doing, got an idea. In this case, though, is video really important these days? Like to be able to really professionally produced, I don't know, 10-minute video, 30-minute video, 2-minute video. Where does that come in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I personally, and I don't know, Dan, you might disagree with this. I feel like people put too much stock into video, honestly.
Yeah.
And they think like, oh, if we just craft a perfect 3-minute video and then just send it to all of our friends on Facebook, everybody's gonna just, be so moved and give big. I mean, it does have its usefulness. I'll say that, but it's definitely, in my mind, a much more of a public phase activity.
I see.
Where you're trying to get the $50, $100 gift, rather than sitting and meeting with somebody and explaining, what you're trying to accomplish. Right. That's going to be much more effective than, hey, check out this video, and then please give $500,000 to this cause, right? Usually not that kind of response. Yeah.
Right.
Dan, would you agree?
Yeah. I agree, Steve. And the only time where, one time it can make sense is I've seen a fly-in video. It was used on a rendering, but it was all 3D, and there was a fly-in that was showing this new library, and it kind of showed all the features and special aspects of that library and what made it special. If you're trying to appeal to a top level donor, that there are times where that might work, but I think in general, I would agree. I think it's more for the public phase.
Our friend Christian Koff, great scholar at the University of Colorado, great John Ford scholar, asks Dan, you talked about needing a strong board, even before a feasibility study. What makes for a strong board? What do you do if you don't have a strong board? How do you get one?
Yeah, no, that's really important for an organization. And, I consider a strong board that, they're able to contribute in a couple of ways. One is be an advocate for the organization, and a strong advocate, to be a strong donor for the organization. They don't necessarily have to be the top donor, but they need to, lead by example through their own giving. And then, another aspect would be someone who's really good to connect the organization to others who could have impact, positive impact for the organization. So you're looking for those types of things in a board member. And who, obviously, the assumption is there's a strong connection to the organization, and they're mission aligned. And now, how do you go out and find? Good question. I think it could be a lot of different ways of finding good board members. It could be looking at donors who have supported your organization in the past, that you're doing some research, looking for certain traits, and it could be networking with leaders in the community or leaders in your organization's area, whether, depending on what sector you're in, and you're asking for recommendations. And so, and then when it comes to a campaign, I feel like a good board is going to, you're going to have 100% giving to the campaign. They're going to be giving at significant levels. They're going to be helping identify potential donors. They're going to be hosting events, just being helpful with the campaign. It's a heavy lift for fundraising and for an organization. And so it's really important for the board to participate in that way.
Along the same lines, and Steve, will give you first crack at this with another board question in the Q&A. Let's say your board does not have a give or get goal. You've never had that, but you're going to go into a capital campaign. How can you set expectations for them for giving for that capital campaign? What would you suggest there?
Yeah, again, I feel like, as we've already kind of mentioned, campaigns like a really great opportunity to reset some of these things, like to not only check in with your major donors, but kind of check in with your board. Like, hey, you're part of this board. We have this initiative now to talk about, and this plan that could really elevate our organization. Let's talk about your giving. Let's set that expectation early on. I think one mistake a lot of times can be the decisions are made maybe by just the board chair or the head of the organization without a lot of input. And then they start going down the path of the campaign and realize everybody in the board isn't really behind it. And then it could be kind of awkward to go back and be like, hey, really need your support on this. I would say bringing the entire board and getting as much unity and consensus in as soon as you can, as early on in the process, is the way to go. And again, provides that opportunity to have the discussion around a particular initiative or project. It's kind of like a built-in excuse to do that.
Very good. Dan, anything else you'd say on that?
Nope, Steve covered it well.
Yeah. Great question. Let's just stay. I am getting to all the questions, by the way. Now we have good questions in this one. If I run out, I have more to ask you guys. This is a very practical question. Let's stick with you, Steve. Sounds like it's from a church leader. A church started a campaign right before COVID, paused it very understandably. I think a lot of people did that, didn't know how everything would affect it, the campaign. How do you restart? They're building an addition onto a church. What recommendations did you give to restarting that campaign?
Yeah, just to say, you're definitely not alone. Like you said, Jeremy, I think a lot of churches and other organizations were in that exact scenario, and it was probably the right thing to do to pause, depending on the circumstances, and the project. But I would say, restarting would really be appropriate. I feel like enough time has passed that, again, not to be beating a dead horse, but do another feasibility study. Maybe it's a modified one where you're kind of reaching out to the folks who participated. Hey, it's been a few years. COVID happened. A lot's changed.
Yep.
Maybe your personal priorities have changed. Maybe our needs as a parish have changed. it's a good thing to do regardless of, whether it's attached to a campaign or not. So allowing people that opportunity to say, yeah, it has been 2 years, but here's where I'm at now. And, give them that opportunity, not only to share that feedback, but like Dan was saying, let you know where they're at and how they might feel about you launching again. So, although again, it is kind of an upfront expense, I think it will pay for itself 100-fold when you actually get down to resetting and restarting.
Dan, you have anything to say about that?
We're working with several clients that did pause and then restarted. And the challenge is it does throw you off. You have to re-energize people. Like, it depends where you were when you paused. Like, one organization, we paused before we got to the feasibility study, so that was kind of good, because like Steve said, if you had the feasibility study before the pause, then 2 years or a year or whatever that pause was can alter really the feasibility on that, and to re-energize the people that were involved, the volunteers, and even the staff. There may have been some turnover, so it is going to be more to get it going again. But I would say stick with the basics of what's going to get you there for the campaign, and possibly do another feasibility study if you need to, like Steve said.
Would you rebrand? Would you think about rebranding, maybe renaming it, or is that even more confusing?
Yeah, I mean, probably not. I probably wouldn't rebrand it,
Yeah. It feels like people understand COVID happened, right? I mean, it's like it was a big thing. It was in all the papers. Yeah, people knew it. You didn't make it up. It was a good reason to pause. So, right. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a great question, by the way, and one that I think relates to a lot of people. So thank you for asking it. Another good question. And it's a little different, a little interesting. Let's say you got a major matching grant, and I don't know, Alexandra, how big this major matching grant was, but let's say, I'm assuming it's like $1 million, maybe bigger, maybe not. Major means different things to different people. Would you consider building a campaign around matching that grant in the same way? Would you do that the exact same way as a capital campaign, or would you do that differently? Dan, we'll stick with you on that.
So it depends. I'm not sure exactly, one, how big that grant is,
$1 million for the sake of conversation.
What it sounds to me like is an opportunity. It sounds like an opportunity, because when you have money, like a maybe something you weren't expecting, you can be even more creative, in your campaign, and you can use it in a creative way. And so, I think there are lots of different ways to use matching grants. You can use it in the quiet phase. You can find a top level donor to challenge other top potential donors, and in that quiet phase, you can challenge people, to give at those really high levels in the gift pyramid. Where I like matches probably more than anything is in the public phase, where you're launching to the masses and you're unveiling an opportunity to match up against another donor's dollars. So there's leverage there, and people like to see their money being leveraged. So I'm not sure if that answers Alexandra's question, but I do feel like when you have large sums of money like that come in, that gives you an opportunity to be creative, and to go farther in your campaign.
Thanks for the question. Steve, a question for you. How do you communicate progress on the campaign to people who have already pledged or donated, especially if it's going on for a while? Maybe it's dragged on during COVID, it's gone a little longer than we think. Or if it's always planned to be a 5-year campaign. How do you keep people engaged, excited, feeling like they did something important? What's that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of times, like we said, you're asking people to pledge over 3 or 5 years, and you might not be able to really act on those plans until a lot of that money is realized or materialized. So it's like, okay, you get everybody kind of charged up and excited. They make their pledge, and then a year or two goes by before they really see anything happen. And that's not a great situation if you're not really communicating over that entire stretch of time. So it would also kind of, I would say, lead to the question of pledge redemption in general.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure, like, once you've done all the work of the campaign and raised the pledges, raised the money, that you have a good pledge redemption strategy in place so that those pledges actually get fulfilled and you can, execute those plans you had. So that's sending regular reminders, even though people might tell you they don't really need that. And those reminders then can also be an opportunity to communicate with people about, and I would say it could be about the organization in general, but also could be on the project that you're really still looking forward to, and updating them on where you're at in the planning and if it's a construction progress, on the design and building stages. So that hopefully there's some sort of progress, even if it's not really visible to from the outside, that you can continue to update people on.
Would you ever think about doing like a special campaign newsletter, or that's every month or every quarter, that's branded with the campaign, signed by the president? You ever do something like that?
I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Again, and it could be to emphasize the other question. You don't want to cannibalize your regular giving. So this helps you communicate, this is separate. This is above and beyond. It's a temporary thing, but it's an extraordinary thing. So even, in parallel with your regular annual fund communication, a separate branded campaign newsletter or message or email or something would be very appropriate. And I think, I think that'd be a good idea.
I like your point that it emphasizes, if you do something like that, emphasizes that this is different than your other giving. Dan, what other tips do you have for keeping your capital campaign ask from at all cannibalizing your annual fund giving with people? How do you handle that in the solicitation process? Yeah.
Well, one of the things you have going for you is a lot of donors understand the need to maintain that annual fund support. And it's funny in fact, I talked to a donor today when I was doing an interview, feasibility study interview, and they got to that point before I even got a chance to say that, hey, what would you give? We want to make sure this is above and beyond your annual gift. And so that's
donors aren't stupid, it turns out.
They're not stupid. So that's good, but it is really important when you're approaching. So it starts in the feasibility study. If you want to make sure your interview questions, whoever's doing the interviews, that they're making sure that when they're asking about, hey, would you participate in the campaign, and if so, at what level, you make sure that they understand that that's at a level above and beyond their annual giving. And then each solicitation, your strategy, you should, ideally, when you're working with your portfolio, you should put together a solicitation strategy for each donor that you're maintaining on a regular basis. That includes their annual. I mean, it depends. Sometimes you're not a generalist. You may be just a major gift officer or an annual gift, but each donor should have, what their annual gift solicitation strategy and their major gift campaign and planned gift strategy should be. So you have you're looking at the whole donor and how they're approached.
Right. Yeah, you just have to be thoughtful about it, make it clear as you're approaching them. It's a great question again. Hey, how much did you spend? So we want to raise $5 million for a building. It's not a lot. It could be 50 million. We're talking universities, it's 5 billion or whatever, but let's just be reasonable. Let's say 10. I'm gonna make it 10 million. Inflation's here. I just read today, 10.9% inflation in Phoenix in 1 year. Unbelievable. But anyway, we're raising 10 million, Steve. How much should I spend? What's my capital campaign budget? Like, hopefully, first of all, how do I get my chairs, my board, and maybe my CEO to understand that we're going to need to spend more money, right? Almost certainly to raise this additional $10 million. And then, yeah, how much should we be looking at spending? What's reasonable?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get that question a lot as well. And the numbers you tend to hear, I would say generally, you don't want to be spending more than 5 to 10%, maybe a little north of that, depending on the size of the project and everything, or the size of the goal. But I would say just, as we continue to say, this is, again, above and beyond. It's an extraordinary thing that is on top of your general operating and your leadership and staff's regular day jobs, right? So to think that we can run a campaign on top of what we're already doing, which is, working hard to meet our annual fundraising goals, is unrealistic. Like, to just think you can do that with no investment is unrealistic. And I think, a lot of times boards are made up of successful people, business people, and if you can put it in those terms, that would be more convincing. Like, would you consider not investing at all in expansion of your business or something, and just hope that you put that on the backs of your employees to execute or something? So I think sometimes that can be convincing, but it is, it's that old truism. You got to kind of spend money to make money. It is an investment that pays off, obviously, but this other, I think part of this question is what should be a part of that budget. Certainly it's going to be an increase in probably activity in your time. If you're paying for, if you're partnering with a consultant like us, we take a lot of that off your plate in terms of the strategy, project management, execution of a lot of these campaign-related activities. So you're outsourcing a lot of that, which obviously we think is a good idea, because of all the reasons I just mentioned, with day jobs and existing responsibilities. So that should be a part of it. You're going to probably be sending more mail. You're going to be trying to conduct more visits, so there's travel expenses as a part of that. And when you get to that, collateral, video, like,
rendering.
I was kind of downplaying that earlier, but a video probably is a good idea to do at some point, especially in the public phase.
Yeah. Dan, anything you'd add? It's 5%, 7%, 10%. What do you think?
I mean, I would probably, it depends on the size of the campaign. So like if it's a big university campaign, it's going to be lower in the, below 5%. If it's more like smaller organization, smaller campaign, I would say it's going to be closer to 5%, of the budget. Now it does depend, but that those points are really critical, that Steve mentioned. You got to account for expenses that you're going to incur.
Yeah. It is one of the things. This is going to lead me to my next question, which might be our final question. Is one of the things I think we see why campaigns fail is organizations don't invest additional resources into helping them be successful. So if you think you're going to raise an extra 2, 5, 10, 20, $50 million without spending any extra money, it's just not how it works. Unless you have a lot of people sitting around nothing to do, which most nonprofits are not in that situation. Or if you have 3 people, are going to give you the money. Okay, it's 3 meetings, great. But that's not typically how it works. You really got to take some time to put together a case statement. You got to take some time to put together the nice piece of collateral, the renderings, maybe a video, to going through the file and figure out who the top prospects are for this campaign and what the strategy is for each of those prospects, and then managing that whole the execution of the cultivation and solicitation. So why else, Dan, besides not investing into success, some reasonable amount of money, why else do campaigns fail in your experience?
Yeah. When there's not proper planning put into place to, we kind of hit on some of these topics, but like alignment with leadership, that's really critical. I've seen that before. And then I would say a compelling case for support as well. So, just like, you'll hear that endowment fundraising is harder to raise money for, and it's true. So, but it doesn't mean you can't raise money for endowment support, but you need to make sure that case for support is really strong. So how you craft that message and how it's going to impact people in the organization, that's really critical. Another reason for failure would be lack of donors. And like, sometimes a smaller, really young organization wants to jump into a campaign, and they don't have that donor base yet to really tap into, because you're just not going to pull donors out of thin air. And so, and then on the flip side of that, I would say donor fatigue. So like, if you keep on going back to the well and you're not having a good churn of donors kind of come into the organization, that donor fatigue, it will wear people out, and it will prevent success, in a big fundraising initiative.
Yeah. Steve, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's all. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I would add maybe just like this thought, which is, don't try to avoid kind of the all or nothing mentality, I would say, especially maybe if you're a younger organization and you don't have that donor base. Like, is there a way you can scale this project or this program in a way that, hey, if we only raise, a certain percentage of what we hope to raise, we can still do something. We can still go back to our donors and say, we were successful. We didn't get the grandiose vision of what we had hoped for, but at least we can do something through this campaign, so it's not a all or nothing, win or bust situation. I would say, and try to have that kind of early on in the planning process. A lot of times, we'll start engaging with the client. It's like they've designed this grandiose plan, and then they have to go back and rescale that plan down, right? And then you're paying the architect more fees to kind of rescale the project down to what would be actually feasible and accomplished and could be accomplished. So kind of maybe go into the planning process with that in the back of your mind.
Like, my one last thought before we go is, and we touched on this at the very beginning, but it doesn't always have to be a capital campaign. I've seen that a campaign like strategy work really well for trying to scale up programs or develop new programs or new initiatives, where it has an end, like Dan said at the beginning, it has a beginning and an end. It has a name. It has its own case for support, has its own collateral built around it, its own sort of story, and I've seen that really work well. So if you're not in a position where you want to build a building and you're not trying to grow an endowment, but you do have real needs to grow your program, sometimes like, hey, a 2-year campaign, the X whatever campaign to build your programs, where you try to get special gifts to do that, can be really effective. So that's something to think about. I'll leave you with that. I'll also leave you with this. Don't forget, if you want to come to Winter Park, spend some time with us, I will be there in Florida, April 6th. We'd love for you to join us. There's a link in the chat, also AmericanPhilanthropic.com/events and masterclasses. If you want to do capital campaigns and not just like the talking that we did here today, which I hope was semi-useful, but actually do the masterclass and campaigns, those are coming up. A couple are coming up in the next few months. Learn more at AmericanPhilanthropic.com/events. Use the code Civil Society, get 20% off. Anything else, Dan or Steve, before we go?
No, I can't think of anything. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'm Swiss. I always end on time or just before. Time's very important to me. So we've done it once again, right on time. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.